answers. Yeah, Frank.
So, what's the capability of the 55-pound ones versus the 4-pound ones?
More lift. You really could put.
If you think about it from a technological point of view, is there much more that you could do besides lifting things up?
Yeah, I think the two things are related. You can put much better camera systems on the bigger ones, better gimbals, powered gimbals, things that, where you can actually train the gimbal around. From a bad guy point of view, 55 pounds, you put a weapon on it, a pretty good explosive charge. This 55 pounds kind of came out of nowhere. It started with this 2012 congressional thing, which got lobbied by the model aircraft industry, there's actually a model aircraft association. And they went to Congress and they kind of panicked because they didn't want Congress to put out something that was going to cause them problems. So somehow, I guess somebody said, well, gee, how big can a model airplane be? And somebody came up with the idea of 55 pounds would be the upper limit. And now this 55-pound thing, it's like the 20% line for HEU. Now everybody's going to think that there's something magical about 55 pounds. And, other than the fact that it relates kilogram-wise to 20 kilograms, or about 20 kilograms. There's nothing magical about 2 kilograms in terms of being a micro UAV. It just happens to be kind of a convenient cutoff. But the weights are all considered to be the weight of the aircraft plus what it's carrying. In other words, you can't fly a 55-pound drone and carry a 100-pound package with it, even though it might be technically capable of doing that.
But from a privacy point of view, whether you have a 2-kilogram one or 55-kilogram one, you can have the same capability in terms of video and stuff like this.
Sure. The little one that we bought, the DJI one, the one that's like on the first view graph here, that's fully capable of hovering outside your window. The problem with that is when you put a GoPro, the camera that comes with it is a very nice resolution camera. There's some nice video that I took in various places here in Monterey, and then when I was in Middlebury, flew it,
that was outside my house then.
10-degree stuff. It's very nice, but it doesn't have audio. If you use a GoPro, you have audio, but all you hear is the whirring of the motor. You can hear other things when somebody's near it and talking, you can hear them over the motor. But if I went and tried to hover outside your window and listen to what you're saying in your office, I wouldn't hear anything. All I hear is the motor running. But yeah, the privacy issue that everybody's concerned about is not an inconsequential issue. What does this mean if the California Highway Patrol wants to operate under Part 107 and fly down the freeways looking for traffic accidents using a drone that weighs less than 55 pounds? Okay, well, presumably they could do that. They could do it, below 500 feet, but it wouldn't be very useful because how would you maintain line of sight? They say you can't do it from a moving vehicle. So, you could cover one little part of the freeway. And that's kind of counterproductive because this type of thing, like flying down a freeway or patrolling a canal area or something like that, is the kind of thing that people want to do where you get some bonus for doing this with a relatively cheap drone as opposed to an expensive helicopter, which you have to pilot maintenance and all that sort of thing. And for some of these things, if you're going down I-5, a CHP officer with one of these drones, up so they could see, miles ahead, what would be the problem with that? If it crashed, it might bounce off the roof of somebody's car. Now, if it weighs 55 pounds and it came down from 500 feet on top of your car, that's not inconsequential. I think they really need to think a little bit more about the heavy stuff. But I think going back to what I said earlier, I think what they're going to do is they just said, hey, ain't my job. We got told to do this. We were working on it. You're forcing us to do this, so here's what you get. And like it along.
You mentioned a requirement in there to inform the airport if you're operating within a certain distance.
Yeah, it actually says inform air traffic control, which.
Because that makes sense below the 500-foot level. Obviously, that's where a lot of things are happening.
Yeah, I think it does in the sense that you don't want, here's what you don't want to have happen. You don't want to have, commuter aircraft land at the Monterey airport saying, oh my God, we almost hit a drone. Because they might see it and, it might be, well separated from them, but they're going to report it anyway. It's a lot better that the airport knows that there's a drone operation going on in such and such a place. But on the other hand, if hundreds of people in Monterey want to start operating drones, we're within 5 miles of the airport, as we sit here. If hundreds of people around town want to operate drones, that really diverts a lot of the controllers' attention from what they should be doing, which is worrying about airplanes coming into town. Now, having said that, the little drone that we have, this DJI drone, we could go up in the approach path, we know where it is, over DLI, and fly up, and just sit there. And that would be a little scary. I mean, it'd be hard to hit an aircraft intentionally. But if you did it long enough, probably one would impact you. I mean, it's like running into a bird or something like that. But, it's not a very good terrorist scenario. Now at Middlebury, one of the things that I did was, what I've done here in the fall, was essentially say, here's a small sum of money, here's a shopping thing, go on the internet and figure out how you could buy a drone, actually shopping list, come up with a drone, come up with how you're going to trigger a hand grenade that you can deliver, a kilometer away and operate the drone through onboard camera. And for less than $1,000, you can do that, minus the cost of the hand grenade. Let's assume the hand grenade's free. I was kind of stunned because 3 women came up with the following idea for triggering the hand grenade. They said, well, it's pretty easy. You just attach a mason jar to the drone, and with a screw top, you put the thing on. You get a Mark 67 hand grenade, pull the pin out of the hand grenade, stick it in the mason jar, screw it on, and when this thing crashes into something, the mason jar breaks, the spoon flies off, and it detonates. I said, where did you come up with that? Oh, it's a website on IEDs. Mm-hmm. So, all that information's out there. So there are some real concerns that, can be had, but you can drive yourself nuts. I think it's far more terrifying somebody flying an ultralight, mm-hmm. which can have a pretty good lift capability, with a suicide vest on, or 100 pounds of explosive, with them. If you get a suicidal person with an ultralight, far more dangerous than somebody with a drone.
It seems to me it'd be easier to spot somebody in an ultralight than zoom along than
Sure.
your 10 pounds.
Sure. Sure, but I bet you that if somebody came up to the somewhere in the Beltway, spread out their ultralight, took off, kept at low altitude and headed for the White House, they might get, I'd say it's 50-50 that they would get intercepted before getting there. There's enough of a lot of people would say, hey, look, cool, there's a guy in an ultralight, or a woman in an ultralight. Other people would get alarmed, maybe would be called in. If you were going to do that for real, you'd want to be as close. You'd want to launch as close as you could. But middle of the night, launching from the mall would not be hard to do. I mean, I've often been, if you've ever had a chance to go or get a chance to go to the balloon festival at Albuquerque, the hot air balloon festival, it's a great contrast to here. Here in Northern California, when somebody launches a hot air balloon, it's a big production. Down there, they launch 100 balloons at dawn. People just come up, kick the thing out of the truck, and hit their, start filling the bag and lift off. It's a lot different. So I think if you drove up to the mall in the middle of the night, knew what you were doing, and spread your stuff out and jumped on and took off, not suggesting that's a great idea, but there are ways that people can do these things cleverly. But we're a pretty well regulated society, if you think about it. If you look at, for example, assassins throughout history, at least in the United States, most assassins have dealt with things with a handgun or a rifle. People don't tend to, use 500-kilogram bombs to do assassinations, or even hand grenades. Although somebody threw a hand grenade at Bush, which really didn't get much news because it didn't go off, and they found it like a day or two later. They didn't realize what it was. This was some visit in Eastern Europe, I think. Where was? Do anybody remember this? Can you Google it? Bush and hand grenade, and I think it was in one of the Eastern Bloc countries.
It's a bit of a reverse of what you said, but it's relevant in the sense that in the 1990s, there were a lot of U.S. government-sponsored studies of WMD applications. I worked on a 2-year study that involved the Reserve Corps, National Guard, looking at terrorist use of WMDs. And it occurred to me in retrospect after 2001 that we overlooked the more obvious, which is terrorists are going to use what they can do, what's already available. What was that? It was the innovation of making an airplane into a weapon.
People had actually, although it came as a great shock and disappointment to the nation, people had talked about flying airplanes into things. If you look at, there was an air hijacking. One of the threats was to fly the aircraft into a nuclear reactor. This long preceded 9/11. So it was not an unknown event. I think people overestimated how difficult it would be, not only to do the hijacking, but to do the piloting. I mean, the people who flew those aircraft on 9/11 had very low piloting skills. And they didn't require high-level piloting skills. Once the aircraft was in the air, it's the engine startup, it's a system operation, and that sort of thing. Stick and rudder pushing the thing around. And if you notice, in the World Trade Center things in a high angle bank, because they were missing their target. And unfortunately, they got back on track with it. And the one at the Pentagon hit well short of where they intended to be. And that was just lack of piloting skill. Hitting the Pentagon, crashing the Pentagon, is not as easy as most people would think. It's like landing on a runway to some extent.
Well, I'm sure you've had the experience of flying towards National Airport, coming up at Potomac, and you look to your left, a few thousand yards, there's every monument you can think of on the right. Here comes National. I mean, how hard would it be to veer to the left and take out these various targets?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can drive yourself nuts thinking about all the terrible things that people could do given X amount of knowledge. But then again, you go back to, why would a terrorist try and do something? Why would they want to use a UAV? Why would they not want to just deliver a bomb by car or a truck or something they understand pretty easily, or a suicide vest? I mean, they understand a suicide vest. I think terrorists do what they're comfortable with doing, because otherwise they're in an area of uncertainty, and they don't want to be in an area of uncertainty. They want to do what they want to do and get away with it, or convince some poor individual that blowing themselves up is a good idea. Yeah, sure.
So going up with the privacy aspect of the drones, I remember in class we talked about several cases that the government authorities and police departments use drones to locate like marijuana farms or
could use it, sure.
So if they don't require, or if the new regulations don't require certification, does that apply also to the law authorities?
Yeah, I mean, right now to operate a drone, for a police agency to operate a drone, they need to have a certificate of authorization. They can also do the supplemental type certificate with the experimental category, but they don't. They get a certificate of authorization because they're a public operation. And so right now, that would be kind of inhibiting, but this will allow them to do that. And then they could do that kind of thing. But again, they're going to have to be, below 500 feet. The issue then becomes, this whole thing, once it goes into effect, triggers a whole bunch of issues. It triggers federal preemption. I mean, the state of California can't say, well, we won't allow you to fly drones more than 200 feet above ground. No, you can't do that. This is, federally regulated, and the state of California can't come up with any restrictions on that. And conversely, they can't, in fact, in this sort of situation, they can't say in the state of California you can operate up to 1,000 feet. That would be in violation of the federal regulations. So, but the issues then become for, even though this is allowed now, let's say this went into effect, this is described, so the police go out and they buy a small UAS, less than 55 pounds, police officer Jones gets an operator's license, they go through all this stuff. That doesn't mean that they can fly the thing around and do warrantless searches. Okay. That again becomes a question which the courts are going to have to deal with, and there are a whole bunch of things about surveillance from the drone. And as we discussed in class, the best analogies are probably from the manned aircraft cases. And what's dangerous about this is the manned aircraft cases have almost totally now said that it's okay to do a warrantless search. It's okay for the Monterey police to, they suspect Ferentz, okay? And they know where he lives, and it's okay for them to go get a helicopter and hover near Ferentz's house and look down into his property, even into what we call the curtilage, which is the area right around the house or the home. And I keep picking on Ferentz because that's easy. And Ferentz knows I don't need anything. It's easy for them, they can do that without a warrant. And if they see something that they perceive as illegal, and the courts first held this up and they said, well, okay, anybody could be flying along a helicopter, they could look down, but this is no more than that. And some of the judges, particularly Sandra Day O'Connor, said, well, wait a minute, that's not right. We're not talking about somebody who just happened to look down as they were flying by. These people went out targeting the people. This is a case called Florida versus Riley, which is a helicopter. And there's Carciolo in fixed wing aircraft. So that's pretty well done. So their logic was, okay, if it's in the navigable airspace and it's an allowed operation, then you don't need a warrant. Well, now we've said anywhere below 500 feet in Class G airspace, you can operate this thing. Doesn't say anything about, you have to be so far away from a building or anything else. You could operate this thing and look in a window. And the police could say, well, we were operating it totally, we were flying along looking in windows. And I don't think that's what the court intends. So there's going to be a privacy battle over this. If they had said, like the Canadians said for the micro UAS, 100 feet away from buildings, then there'd be some, back and forth. If you're 100 feet away from the building and you're looking at the building and somebody has an open window and you can see in, well, maybe that's okay. And maybe the court would say, Supreme Court would say, maybe the Supreme Court would say, well, in the aircraft cases, we said it was okay as long as they were operating in, the airspace, as long as they're not using any enhanced technology. So if they're just using the, like a cell phone camera type camera, which is no better than the human eye, and they're 100 feet away from the building, which is allowed, then okay. Maybe that's what they would say. But there's also a whole argument about not being able to do surveillance with these types of things because they can be long-term persistent. There are a couple of court cases where they said, okay, this surveillance, if it were carried out for a long period of time, we would say is a violation, constitutional violation. But police agencies can't do this all the time, and it's no worse than following somebody in a car. But if you start doing it with a drone and you can do it, for long periods of time, maybe they'll say that's no good too. But all this is going to cause litigation.
Also, the country was Georgia.
Georgia, that's where the grenade was from. When was it?
2012
2012.
or something.
No, that can't be right. It can't be
That's right.
2012. Yeah, because it was George
Yeah,
Bush 43.
or 2010, March 2010, or 2005.
2005 sounds
Something
right.
different.
Yeah, 2005 sounds right. He
Yeah.
was on a visit, and somebody in the crowd threw something, and nobody realized what it was. Turned out it was a hand grenade, which would kind of have been a big deal.
Where did that happen?
In Georgia.
In Georgia? Wow.
So, not a very well known, and I guess there are some questions about whether it was an assassination attempt or who was the person who threw the shoe? There's also a shoe throwing incident.
That was in Iraq and Baghdad.
That was in Baghdad when he visited Baghdad. Some journalist I think threw a shoe. But I think this kind of got dismissed as maybe being similar to a shoe until they found out that it was actually a hand grenade. So, any other questions, comments? Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.